Okay. So from James, is the question, how does the living method help someone in long-term recovery? So, by long-term recovery, I'm assuming you mean conventional recovery from alcohol or drug addiction. The living method is a method of non-dual inquiry, that's used within the context of spirituality and mysticism. So in this program, we use the living method as an approach to our addiction to self, which as the spiritual dimension of recovery in conventional recovery, it can deepen that aspect of conventional recovery. It's like a supplemental resource, I guess. You're what's the phrase? Burning the candle from a different end, but it's the same process, just from a slightly different angle. So as the belief in separation and misidentification with self thins and softens, that it greatly improves one's quality of life, which is all about what recovery is all about: being able to live a meaningful life and be a human among humans, be of service. And what better way to do that than have whatever patterning comes up not be distorted by selfishness and self-centeredness and egocentric patterns and tendencies. So that's one way of seeing how non-dual inquiry and this program can help conventional recovery. I think if there's anything else I wanted to say about that. Just got another emailer. Apologize. No, I think that's I think that's all that's coming out. Hopefully, I answered some aspect of your question. Let me close my email. It's not distracting. How often? So another question is, how often should I practice self-inquiry? So that's a bit tricky, I think, because on one hand, like Freddavis always says, repetition is the mother of clarity. So it's important to keep consistency with this kind of investigation, just like in any movement in conventional recovery. You would, go to meetings every day, you would call people, utilize those resources so that there's momentum and integrity in living a life of recovery. So within this context, in non-dual recovery, it's important to, it's especially important to keep consistency with this exploration, because by default we reference thought, as the roadmap of what's going on here and what we are. So if we want to effectively lessen our dependency on the belief in separation and misidentification as a self and just live from the truth of what we are, then there needs to be some aspect of, making a point to prioritize this clearing and awakening process on, somewhat of a daily basis, just because the pull towards not doing that, the pull towards maintaining and perpetuating the story and identification of self is so strong. It's important to have structures in place or just opportunities throughout the day where there is that pause, where there is that opportunity to slow down and actually, notice alertly. So I would say if we're just starting out, I wouldn't even say that. So if we're just starting out, if we, are just getting interested in non-duality or have just had an awakening, then self-inquiry and the sense of being meditation and those kinds of practices are of active noticing and cultivating the willingness to continue to notice the truth of what we are and the truth of what we're not. That is important because it sets this foundation. But at the same time, I've seen, like, over and over again with people that I've worked with, and certainly within myself, that it's really easy to get fixated on this idea that I need to engage with the practice from this really rigid sense of urgency. Like, if I don't do inquiry today, then, I'll never be free, or I'm going backwards, I'm regressing, I'm like with the same kind of self-importance that we approached every other aspect of our life. Just another excuse of beating ourselves up. It's not what this is about. I would say it's a both and, right? Like, it is important, to notice if there's resistance to doing inquiry, if there's resistance to taking the time for this exploration and this process. That is important to notice if that's there. And it is important to set aside time for inquiry, for seeing through beliefs and unknowing what we've rigidly known for our whole lives, right? But at the same time, it can be counterproductive or harmful if we hold anything too firmly. A good example of this is okay, I'll answer that question in a second. So a good example of holding inquiry too firmly is if there's a difficult emotional reaction that comes up, like maybe I feel angry or like really upset about something out of nowhere. It doesn't seem to be coming from a place of distraction. It's just a conditioned response that comes up, and I'm very much overtaken by the experience. Fred calls it unit overwhelm. If you try to, kill that response with inquiry, that's besides the point, because in that instance, inquiry is actually trying to change the experience rather than what it's for, which is to lessen the resistance to the experience. Non-duality isn't about changing what is, it's about surrendering to what is. It's about noticing that there's only what is and nothing else. So if we're using a practice like inquiry to try to change our experience, then that's a misunderstanding. We've gone down the rabbit hole. We're missing the point. So I hope that was helpful. Another question is, how long should a person with drug or alcohol addiction be sober or clean before looking at non-duality and what the living method suggests? That's a great question. So again, it depends. Just with the inquiry question, a lot of this takes some reflection and discernment. Like what does it actually feel like wants to happen, and being willing to move in that direction. But at the same time, if, for example, if somebody has just learned about non-duality, both in active addiction or right after getting sober, and feels curious about looking in that direction, I would say that sorry, I'm confused, but it's a thing. If it's important that we take care of what the body needs, like first and foremost, because if we just start to, get some time under our belt where we're abstent from a destructive pattern, or just, getting sober for the first time, and we hear something like, you don't exist, that can be extraordinarily destabilizing. Like, that's not a good, that's not definitely not a good place to go. So it's, I would say, like, if you're first getting sober, at least 6 months clean is crucial. I would say ideally longer than that, but whatever happens. And then for, if this isn't your first rodeo, trying to get sober and you're in and out, you've had some clean time before, and if both sobriety and non-duality aren't necessarily super new, then I would say the amount of time matters less. But it's the most important thing is keeping in mind what is actually best for my physical well-being. Because even though we're not exclusively the body is us. It's made of awakeness. It's the way that we're expressing and exploring ourselves as the divine. So it's, we need to, we need to take care of these first. It's not, if I get sick, I'm not going to ignore or avoid my medical needs just because of, hearing a alluring philosophical viewpoint that, the world is an illusion. Go to the doctor. Like it's important to take care of the body, because without addressing the body's needs first, we're, living a life of recovery is not even feasible. So yeah, just be smart about it, I guess. I hope that was helpful. I have no idea what I'm saying. Or we have some more time. I think we're going to 45 minutes, so we have about 20-ish minutes left. All right, so Tim says, thanks, Bo. The tendency to avoid truth and clarity by the belief I should feel guilty and wrong about patterns noticed happens. Can you share on the FBR approach to this? Yeah, so there's actually a whole section, I believe, in so FBR is surrounding this book of Fred's Beyond Recovery, Non-Duality, and the 12 Steps. FBR isn't a 12-step program, but it's derived from the commentaries surrounding that framework in this book. So Fred talks about guilt and shame a decent amount in this book, which are, it's very important with regard to recovery, because that's guilt and shame is what fuels avoidance and, self-soothing tendencies quite a bit. So I think just to say that, so there's a lot of good stuff in this book regarding that topic. I would recommend checking out chapters, I believe, 4 and 6 in here. But just to speak on that right now, so I would say that when guilt and shame come up, it's important to look closer at what's actually happening, what's actually here. I mean, that's what inquiry and spirituality really, in its simplest form, is about, is rediscovering wholeness through shedding our false ideas about reality. So when guilt and shame come up, the first, essential question is, who is it that is guilty? Who is it that's wrong? Who is it that's existentially flawed? Like looking at first at the belief in a self that is, that the guilt and shame is in reference to, and then looking closer at what the actual texture of guilt or texture of shame is, what's actually in the felt experience of what we're calling guilt and shame. Because even though there's, an emotional texture to what we call guilt or shame, what presents in the body isn't actually that. Like it's humans are emotional creatures, of course, but what arises as shame it's not actually personal. It's a response. It's an expression. There's nothing personal about this. Another way of thinking about it is, if something happens within an organism like a tree, it's not personal to the tree. It's just a movement of nature. So in the same way, what we're calling guilt, shame, sadness, any sort of emotional response would be more akin to nature. And I think that the more that we kind of orient to our emotions that way, the easier it is to not resist them, really, because the grounds for resisting anything is its implication to a self. I can't handle this because I'm affected. It's too much for me. I'm bad. I need to push this away. That kind of thing. And so if we see through the idea that what's arising is actually personal in nature, is about a self, then just being with and exploring and honoring that relative expression of sadness, grief, guilt, is a lot easier to meet it as the love that we are, because that's really what any emotional texture is looking for, is to be met with compassion. So through the living method, it would be approaching inquiry first, and then in the workbook that I'm creating, I'll have a variety of different templates for inquiries, but this would be an example of what I'm talking about now, is more of an integrative inquiry rather than a disintegrative one. So recognizing that what's appearing, what's apparently happening, is empty of self would be a disintegrative inquiry. Would be, who is this arising to? Can I find a self that this is about? What's noticing that there isn't a self to be found? Like those kinds of questions are more disintegrative movements. And then the leaning in of, is it true that this is actually guilt? Is it true that this is actually shame? Is this actually proof that there's a self here? Like that kind of questioning is more integrative. And so ultimately it's any sort of inquiry, the aim is to see through the belief that what's arising is proof of separation. And that can happen both by looking at the subject, which is, who is this arising to? Is it true that there's a Bo? Is it true that there's a Tim? Is it true that there's a James? Can we find that? Is it true that there's a seer in the scene? That kind of thing. And by seeing that what we're calling shame isn't actually shame, the idea of what, like in knowing less of what something is, in unknowing, the distinction of what's arising is softens. And so the idea that it's actually separation, that just because there's an intense sensation, it isn't proof that there's separation. And so the thought about shame or the thought about guilt really is a distraction from noticing, oh, this sensation is just what is arising that way, is just how oneness is appearing right now. And so inquiry is the way to kind of pierce through the conceptual layer of what's arising and just return to where we never left, as beingness itself. Again, hope that was helpful. I have no idea what I'm don't know what I'm saying. This is fun. Yep, no problem, Tim. Happy I was able to help. Yeah, no problem. So we have about 6 minutes left. Any more questions? If not, that's okay too. So Tim asks, when will this platform be used? Are you referring to YouTube Live? Okay, there are a couple questions. So, Tim, are you referring to YouTube Live? Okay. Yeah, so this YouTube Live will be doing question and answers like this probably once or twice a month. I think that's probably a good amount. Yeah, so more will be shared and uncovered as we figure out the the logistics of things. I'll have to talk to Louise about it. Another question is, what plans are there for the FBR program format and future? Okay, so at present, we are meeting twice a week on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Those are the free meetings, but they're closed, so they're limited to individuals that have had a history with addiction of some kind. It doesn't have to be substance related in particular. It's any kind of addictive tendency. So, internet, excessive shopping, codependency, porn, food, restricting food, any addictive tendency. People that have that in their history of what they've struggled with are more than welcome to come to these free meetings. I think sometime soon, again, I'll have to work out the logistics with the team, but we'll be having small groups where we'll be looking at the nuts and bolts of this clearing process and the essentials of non-dual recovery and what will be presented in the workbook more closely. So that will be open to anyone. It's not going to be limited to people that just have addictive patterns in their history. And so that will be coming out again at some point within the next couple of weeks, hopefully. And yeah, regarding the free meetings themselves, they'll alternate between topics that I'll just come up with or meditations that I'll guide people through. On Wednesday, we did a guided meditation on the sense of being, and people found that very helpful. Other weeks, we'll do readings from this book. I'll choose a section to read and share on it, and the rest of the meeting will be open for sharing and things like that. So it will be exploring different topics, whether it be more experiential or just kind of intellectual, like reading something from a book. And the last Saturday of every month will be a Q&A like this, but within a Zoom meeting. And again, that's closed in nature. So that will be limited to the people within those weekly free meetings. But YouTube lives like this, which will run once or twice a month, are open to anyone. That's that. You're welcome. It's funny hearing what comes through. It's always it's always easier to talk about like them to talk about the more the what is even the word, like the pragmatic or esoteric, the spiritual integrative, the meat of the program. It's easier for that to be spoken about it than when it comes to this logistical stuff. It's like so we'll see if that improves over time. Thank you everyone for helping. I think that's a wrap. Thanks, James. I appreciate your support. And I'm glad this is an easy platform to use. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to close it out. Appreciate your help.